Imagine a nation blessed. A land of breathtaking beauty, from the sun-drenched Caribbean coast to the majestic peaks of the Andes. A country so rich in oil, it was once the wealthiest in Latin America. This was Venezuela. A promise of prosperity, a dream of a future brighter than the tropical sun. But then, the dream was stolen. The lights began to flicker. The shelves grew bare. The hospitals turned into places of despair. The streets, once filled with music and life, became stages for protest and fear. The wealth was looted, the institutions shattered, and the hope of an entire people was systematically crushed under the boot of a ruthless regime. This is not just a story about politics. This is a story about a house on fire. And it's the story of one woman who refused to let it burn. Her name is María Corina Machado. And to understand her, you cannot start in a political party. You have to start in a different kind of room. A quiet room, filled not with the shouts of politicians, but with the quiet, determined sounds of children learning. Before she was a threat to a dictator, she was an engineer, a mother, a builder. She founded an organization called Sumate, a simple, powerful idea. To educate citizens, to teach them how to participate in their own democracy. It was a project of faith, a belief that the true power of a nation lies not in its oil reserves, but in the minds and hearts of its people. She was building, brick by brick, the foundation of a free society. But in a tyranny, building is a revolutionary act. The regime saw her work not as education, but as insurrection. They accused her, they harassed her, they called her a traitor. This was her first lesson in the nature of the beast she was facing. It does not fear guns as much as it fears an informed mind. And so, the builder had to become the warrior. She entered the political arena, not with a desire for power, but with a profound sense of duty. She was elected to the National Assembly, and from that platform she did something that sent shockwaves through the halls of power. She spoke the unvarnished truth. While others whispered in corridors, she stood in the open and named the cancer destroying her country. She called the regime what it was, a dictatorship. She documented the corruption, she exposed the criminal networks. She became the voice for the millions of Venezuelans who had been silenced. And for this, the regime came for her with everything they had. They stripped her of her parliamentary immunity. They banned her from holding public office. They unleashed a torrent of propaganda, painting her as an agent of foreign powers, an enemy of the state. Her colleagues were jailed, her supporters were intimidated, and her own life was threatened. This is the crucible where ordinary people break. But María Corina did not break. With every threat, her voice grew sharper. With every injustice, her resolve grew stronger. She was no longer just a politician, she was a symbol. The symbol of a resistance that would not bow. The years passed. The suffering in Venezuela deepened. A massive exodus, millions fleeing the collapse, a humanitarian catastrophe unseen in the hemisphere. The world watched, often with a shrug. Through it all, María Corina Machado traveled the globe, a tireless ambassador for a nation in chains. She met with world leaders, she testified before international bodies. She stood in front of cameras and made the world see what it did not want to see. She was not asking for pity. She was demanding justice. She was building a case, not in a court of law, but in the court of global public opinion. It was a lonely, grueling fight. The victories were small, the setbacks were enormous. But she understood something fundamental. A dictatorship survives not only on its own brutality, but on the world's indifference. She was determined to shatter that indifference. And then came the turning point, a moment that seemed on the surface like just another act of regime oppression. The government, under immense pressure, was forced to allow a primary election to choose a unified opposition candidate. The people, desperate for change, flocked to the polls in a stunning, defiant display of hope. They chose their champion. They chose María Corina Machado. She won in a landslide, a victory so overwhelming it could not be denied. And what was the regime's response? They immediately declared the primary illegitimate. They reinforced her political ban. They mocked the process. To the outside world, it looked like yet another defeat. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had given her something more powerful than a title. They had given her a mandate. The undeniable, irrefutable will of the people, expressed in a free vote. She was now not just their symbol, but their officially chosen leader. The moral authority she now held was a weapon the regime could not confiscate. The pressure mounted. Sanctions tightened. International allies grew more vocal. The regime, feeling the walls close in, resorted to even greater brutality. Political arrests increased. Yet a strange thing began to happen. The more the regime attacked María Corina, the stronger she became in the eyes of her people. They saw a woman who had lost everything: her position, her security, her privacy, and yet had lost not a single ounce of her courage. They saw a leader who was not fighting for a palace, but for a principle. The narrative was shifting, from a political struggle to a primal battle between good and evil, between the future and the past. The world was finally truly watching. And in the quiet halls of Oslo, the Norwegian Nobel Committee was watching too. The announcement came on a crisp October morning. The world was preoccupied with its usual crises, but for Venezuela, and for all who believe in freedom, time stood still. The secretary of the Nobel Committee stepped up to the microphone. The air was thick with anticipation. The name was read: María Corina Machado. For a second, there was silence, as if the world was processing the significance. And then, an explosion of emotion. In homes across Venezuela, people wept in the streets. Not just her supporters, but ordinary people who had endured so much, saw in this award a validation of their suffering, a recognition of their struggle. It was not a prize for her alone. It was a prize for the mother searching for medicine for her child, for the student protesting for a future, for the political prisoner enduring torture, for every Venezuelan who had refused to surrender their dignity. The award ceremony in Oslo was unlike any other. She did not walk to the podium. She seemed to float there, carrying the weight of a nation's hopes on her shoulders. She was not dressed in the finery of a typical dignitary, but in something simple, solemn, powerful. She stood before the kings and queens, the presidents and prime ministers, and she began to speak. And her speech was not a list of her own achievements. It was a tapestry woven with the stories of the Venezuelan people. She spoke of the bravery of the mothers of the slain protesters. She named the political prisoners one by one, turning the grand hall into an intimate courtroom of conscience. She spoke of Leopoldo López, of Juan Guaidó, of all those who had stood with her. She looked into the cameras directly at the people of Venezuela, and she told them, "This Nobel Prize is not mine. It is yours. You are the peacemakers. You are the heroes. Your resilience in the face of hunger, your courage in the face of bullets, your faith in the face of despair. That is the most powerful force for peace on earth." She turned to the global community, her voice firm. "For too long you have negotiated with our oppressors. You have signed agreements that they spit upon. You have traded with the thieves who starve our children. This prize is a call to you. Do not be complicit. Stand on the side of the people. Stand on the side of freedom. There can be no peace without justice." Her words were not a request. They were a verdict. The applause was thunderous, lasting for minutes, a standing ovation that was a global embrace of the Venezuelan cause. The return to Venezuela was apocalyptic. The regime, humiliated and enraged, tried to block the celebrations. But they were powerless against the tide of joy. Millions poured into the streets. It was not a protest. It was a national coronation. The people had reclaimed their country, not with violence, but with an unbreakable spirit that had now been sanctified by the world's highest honor for peace. The moral authority conferred by the Nobel Prize was a shield that the regime's bullets could not penetrate. The international pressure became an avalanche. The military, seeing the tide had irrevocably turned, began to fracture. The end was near. The final victory did not come with a dramatic battle. Came with a quiet, inevitable collapse. The dictator, isolated and stripped of all legitimacy, fled in the night. The structures of oppression, which had seemed so monolithic, crumbled to dust in a matter of days. And when the day of true democracy finally arrived, when the first free elections in a generation were held, María Corina Machado did not need to campaign. She had already won the heart of the nation. She was sworn in as president, not as a conqueror, but as a servant. Her first act was not to move into the presidential palace, but to open its doors to the public, to turn it from a symbol of power into a symbol of service. The story of María Corina Machado is the story of our time. It is proof that one voice, armed with nothing but truth and courage, can echo louder than the mightiest army. It is a reminder that the fight for freedom is not fought with weapons alone, but with an unwavering conscience. It teaches us that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and that the builders, the warriors, and the peacemakers are often the same person, driven by a love for their homeland so profound that they are willing to sacrifice everything for its redemption. Her Nobel Prize was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of Venezuela's rebirth. And it stands as a beacon for every soul living under darkness, a testament to the most powerful truth of all, that no tyranny, no matter how brutal, can forever extinguish the light of a people determined to be free.